The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. It's Monday. We got a new week on tap. And you got me with most of my voice back. Not 100%, but we are closing in on it, and I am grateful for that. It's been, I honestly don't know. I'm married to a doctor, as many of you have heard me say on this podcast a few times, and so I've now sort of developed the approach to health where you really don't go see a doctor unless you're on your deathbed. And I know I complain about being sick all the time, but I also don't do anything about it. So honestly, I think there may have been a couple of things at play, and it doesn't matter to you guys, but it matters to me. I think there's a very real possibility that I strained something vocally and also had a cold at the same time. I'm not sure that they were actually related in any way, because it seems like now my family is getting the cold that I had, but nobody lost their voice. So I don't know what the hell that was all about. So I think the cold is gone, and I think the voice is almost healed. So what I'm going to do on today's podcast, and you'll never know, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway, is I'm going to do like 3 or 4 minutes at a time, take a break, drink some hot water, and then come back and do another 3 or 4 minutes. See if you can play a game with yourself. When did Dan just walk away? It wasn't right there. I just took a sip on air. I didn't walk away to do that one. I just took a drink right in the middle of the show. All class here at Fantasy NBA Today. The way you'll figure out if I walked away from the microphone to go get a refill or warm up the water is because I'll lose my train of thought, and one thing won't really connect to the next very well. And you're saying, Dan, you do that all the time anyway. Yeah, all right. So anyway, Fantasy NBA Today, it's a hoop ball presentation at Dan Besbris on Twitter. If you want to give me a follow, those of you that are listening now, you probably already have. And we're at that time of the year where nobody's adding any follows on Twitter anyway. The off-season, the playoffs, effectively, but the fantasy off-season. So nothing's going on in the Twitter sphere. It's kind of nice, actually, not to have to be staring at Twitter for news breaks all day long. I'm getting some stuff done. Magical time indeed. This podcast, as all shows here at Hoop Ball, are brought to you by Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. HawaiianIsles.com is the website. Hawaiian, you know how to spell that. I think. You should. Maybe not. We got listeners all across the globe. Hawaii. That's right. There's 2 of them for those of you that are listening abroad. A-N, Isles, I-S-L-E-S. HawaiianIsles.com. They've got a coupon running right now. Doesn't have anything to do with us here at Hoop Ball, but it's there on the homepage. You can check out all their brews. They've got a left nav bar where you can look at all the different flavors. Or, if you'd like, you can follow them on Twitter at HI Coffee. That's actually probably easier to spell. HIKONA Coffee is the Twitter handle. You can ask them questions there. They're very responsive. Or you can just go to Amazon.com, punch in Hawaiian Isles, search for the different flavors. They've got them on Amazon. They've got all their big sellers over there, and you can get them prime through Amazon. I think it's better. I don't know. I should probably check with them before I say it live on air. But I'm pretty sure it's better if you get it through their website. But if you want it fast, and if you have a Prime account, that's probably the fastest way to do it. So, no Ethan Noroff today. It's my fault. I screwed this one up. We were going to do it yesterday. We had about a 2-hour window in the middle of the day between when Ethan saw Avengers Endgame and when I saw Avengers Endgame. We didn't see it together, as you just figured out. We didn't see it at the same theater. It wasn't planned out. We were just texting earlier in the week, last week, to say, hey, when do you want to record over the weekend? Well, my wife was out of town, so I had the kid all day. We had this little window where a grandparent was over here. I could have snuck away to do a show. And then, my voice just really wasn't back yet. Still hurt, actually. Still hurts even today doing the podcast, but we're going to muscle our way through this thing. And I just thought, you know what? I'm not going to push myself. I'm exhausted. I've been dealing with this illness, this voice thing all week. So Ethan will be with Neil later on this week. The Neil Roshlani-led episode. I believe that's, Thursday's episode now. Move some bodies around. So I think Thursday will be Neil and Ethan. Today you've got me solo. I'll be with Neil tomorrow. That's Gambling Tuesday. And Brandon Marcus on Wednesday. As I just mentioned, Ethan and Anil on Thursday, and then Adrian and Coach will wrap up the week on Friday. Some of you mentioned that Adrian is having some audio issues on that Friday show. We are aware of it. We're working on it, trying to get it sorted out as best we can. There's something going on, and we have an idea on it, and it has to do with levels. When the recorder starts, basically when the phone call starts, things get all wonky. And so we're fighting through that one. Don't worry, we'll get it sorted out. We are aware of it. Okay, that's all the logistical stuff I think that is on my mind. In terms of actual basketball stuff, I'm not going to get deep into the playoffs. We'll do a quick recap of what's going on in the different series so far, but that's more fun to really grind through playoff thoughts when you have other people on the broadcast to talk to about it. So I'm not just going to talk to myself, and I don't have any overarching theories on this stuff. I know everybody's talking about the Warriors win over the Rockets on Sunday because of how many calls did not go the way of the Rockets. I'm sure that'll balance out. They'll get a whole bunch of free throws in the next one or the one after that. This is a series where if you're wearing the tinfoil hat, you shouldn't be arguing that the NBA just wants the Warriors to win. You should be arguing that the NBA wants this series to go 7 games. So if you believe in that sort of stuff, and there are times where I do, I don't know that I really necessarily do in this one. I think that there's a lot of narrative stuff that plays into it. But I think that what you're going to see is a very favorable Rockets whistle in at least 2 to 3 of these games. And you're going to see one for the Warriors in a couple of games, and then you're probably going to see one where it's really fairly balanced. Maybe a couple where it's pretty balanced. So if you're a betting man, not a terrible time to take a look at Houston climbing back into the series. Not to say that they're going to win it or that this is a great time to bet on them or whatever, but you may end up with some kind of middling opportunity. Basically, if you think Houston is going to win Game 2, obviously now is the time to go do it. If you think they fall behind 2-0 and then go home and win a game or two, then you wait. And from a game-to-game perspective, well, Houston covered in the opener. They were catching 6.5 points, which seemed like a pretty big number, and it was. And they'll play again tomorrow, Warriors by 5.5, so that number actually came down. That's a little bit, to me, it's a little bit of a scary number. I think Houston could win that ball game outright, but it's a weird one. Milwaukee losing to Boston in the opener of their series. Milwaukee getting blown out at home. Al Horford was outstanding. Bucks are going to have to figure out some other way to attack, and I think they will. They're too good of a team to get waxed like that in a series, especially with the way that we saw them play all season long. And the way we saw Boston, yes, they swept Indiana, but they really struggled to get to that point. There was a lot of defensive battles, and I know Milwaukee can play defense, and I also know their offense is better than what we saw. I'm hoping they come up with a thing. I saw Twitter talking about how Coach Bud is actually very slow with adjustments in the playoffs, so we'll see if that's the case going into Game 2. That's obviously a huge one. Other one out west and another one out east. Toronto up on Philadelphia 1-0. I know Brew was big on this one. He was betting hard into this ball game, basically a lot on the Toronto side, mostly because of the Kawhi Leonard-Ben Simmons matchup. Oddly enough, one of the big factors in that one was the Marc Gasol-Joel Embiid matchup. Gasol using his hands a lot, just big, veteran, strong guy. Gave Embiid a tough time. He had a really poor ball game. I think he plays better in Game 2. I think he probably tries to use quickness a little bit more. Ben Simmons actually played okay. Kawhi was outstanding. A lot of things went Toronto's way in Game 1. I think you're going to see a much better game in the second one of that series. And then Portland-Denver, that one opens up tonight. And I honestly don't know what to make of this thing because all season long I've underrated the Portland Trailblazers. They're catching 4 on the road in Denver. I honestly see no reason why Portland shouldn't be competitive in this series as well. Jokic is good. Took him 7 games to get by the Spurs. Portland is rested, which is helpful because I think Enes Kanter was playing with like a dislocated arm or something weird like that. Obviously, Yusuf Nurkic being around would be a huge development for Portland. They're going to have their hands full defensively since it's not just dealing with Russell Westbrook and Paul George and then everybody else. Denver actually passes. They run some offense. Should be a good series. I think this one could go 7 games also. You may see Denver play 14 games through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs and then just get stomped by whoever comes out of Golden State, Houston. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the playoff stuff. It's not, it's not too terribly interesting for me to just wax poetic about stuff that, I haven't watched every second of these games anyway. What I will wax poetic about on today's podcast are some of the numbers that I brought up briefly on last week's show. It was on Wednesday of last week with Brandon Marcus. I don't know why I said both his first and last name. It was on Wednesday last week with Brandon. We started to get into some of the differences between preseason and final season rankings. And if I recall, and I might not, what we got into very briefly last week is kind of like a broad overview. I just mentioned a few numbers that jumped out at me in terms of where things went haywire. We'll be a little bit more comprehensive going forward here, a little bit more organized, and I will make mention of these things on other podcasts. But what I wanted to do today was just start to go through it a little bit. I did the first 100. I know the last couple of years I've done the top 150, but I think we have a pretty good idea of what we can expect and when, and what's a sort of a small sample size situation. So it's not going to be a one-day podcast. This will be something we stretch over a few days, and I'll try to label them accordingly. So if you wanted to push them all together, you could certainly do so. And so on today's show, which, call it whatever it is right now, I think we're, what is this, like around the 11-minute, 15-second mark of today's pod. This is where you can put a little marker and, save the next 15 minutes or something like that. And then maybe at some point down the line, if I'm feeling particularly lazy, I'll just edit these 3 clips together, and we'll call it a best of. We'll call it a best of comparison pods. So what I'd like to do today, and I think it'll probably end up being the first 30, we'll see how it goes, is just give you the names of the first 30 players pre-rank. We're going to do this by pre-rank. That, to me, is the easiest way to do it. And then their final rank. And then we're going to go through some different stats and what we learned from it. All right? So here's the tedious part. Here's the first 10 players pre-ranked on Yahoo Sports last year. That's the one we're going off of. They're the biggest. As far as I know, they have the largest fantasy basketball contingent. I think they're ahead of ESPN. James Harden, Anthony Davis, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Steph Curry, Karl Anthony Towns, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, Damian Lillard, Russell Westbrook. That was your top 10 being ranked on I believe the pre-rank is on totals, if I'm not mistaken, but we're going to compare it to final season on a per-game average because, you go on, this to me is, from a roto perspective, that's a little bit more useful because someone's going to miss a couple of games. It doesn't matter when. And if somebody misses a ton of ball games, obviously we'll just throw their number out effectively. We'll just sort of take it and launch it out the window. Like a Victor Oladipo. Although it is worth noting, he wasn't having a very good season even before he got hurt, by all accounts. So that one, maybe not a great example. That's a number you probably could throw out either way. But, once we get, like a John Wall, he was pre-ranked 23. His final season on a per-game basis was 73, but he was far worse than that because he only played as much as Victor Oladipo, basically. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Point is, that was the top 10 on a pre-rank basis. Now, on a final average 9-category ranking basis, they go in the following order. James Harden, 2, AD 1, Giannis 5, Steph 4, Kat 6, Durant 9, LeBron 19, Jokic 13, Dame 12, and Westbrook 31. Right from the outset, I think we all knew that Russell Westbrook at 10 in a 9-category format was an idiotic place for him because he can't shoot, and suddenly he can't shoot free throws. There was a thought that maybe that would bounce back this year, but it didn't really. It stayed bad. And obviously his popcorn numbers are crazy. He gets threes, points, rebounds, assists are all nuts. He averages a triple-double. He gets steals. He'll even block a shot or two. A terrible turnover number. But it's the percentages that really weigh you down. That's the crushing thing. Turnovers in Roto, you can pretty easily balance that out with like an Otto Porter or 2 guys like Otto Porter, 2 low turnover guys, and you're all set. When Westbrook is doing that to your free throws and your field goal percent, you really need you kind of need 4 guys to balance that out because there just aren't that many dudes that can balance both of those things. You sort of need 1 or 2 field goal guys to balance it and 1 or 2 free throw guys to balance it out. And they've got to be volume because he's shooting them. So anyway, I don't think anybody thought that Westbrook was going to be inside the top 15. I would argue some people could say, yeah, he's going to be inside the top 20 because his free throw percent is going to come back. Top 30 seemed very reasonable, and that's about where he finished, 31. Here's the different numbers we're going to take away from this. So we had a running tally. I made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 statistical categories coming out of this, and I'll explain them to you here as we go through them, and that's why I think this first one we might get through the first 30. Well, we might even only get through the first 20, depending on when my voice runs out and when I want to put a pin in this thing. Category that we calculated, number 1, the average difference of the last 5 players ranked. And now I'll explain that one. Basically, the start rank to the final rank, there's a difference between them. Right? Simple enough. This is the average final ranking per 5. So this isn't even a difference. I can get my head out of my butt here. So this is just the final ranking of the last 5 guys, the average ranking of the last 5 guys. The average final ranking of the last 5 guys, you have to obviously start with the 5th ranked guy, 5th pre-ranked guy. So that'd be Karl Anthony Towns this year. And the average of the 5 guys, including Cat, leading up to him. So Harden, AD, Giannis, Steph, and Towns, their average final ranking was 3.6. That's pretty good. A best-case scenario would have been there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which you can do the math there pretty quickly. Maybe not that fast. It's 15, right? Simple. 1, 2, 3 is 6. 4 gets you to 10. 5 gets you to 15. Easy enough. Divide that by 5, it's 3. So the best possible outcome there was 3. It's pretty easy average to do. You can do that quickly with any 5 numbers by just taking the middle number, provided you're counting by the same number the whole way through. So for the average to be 3.6 means the top 5 was really freaking close. Really close. And I did that for every grouping of 5. So the next one was Kevin Durant. He was the 6th ranked, pre-ranked guy. So the average final number there was AD, who had 1, Giannis 5, Steph 4, Cat 6, and Kevin Durant 9. And the average of all of those numbers was 5. Pretty good. Again, best case scenario here was 4, and we got a 5. Awesome. That number counts up through the top 10, and we end up having 6 of them. 3.6, 5, 8.6, because LeBron was way off, 10.2, 11.8, and 16.8. This doesn't tell us a whole lot. It tells us kind of a similar number to the difference over the last 5 to 10 between the pre-rank and the final rank, but this is a very quick way to look at it. You say, all right, you know what? How are guys actually performing in this little grouping? So the guy pre-ranked 10, the ranking average of the last 5 guys leading up to him obviously escalates quickly because Westbrook was a big miss. But of the top 9, it's pretty good. Average ranking of, now 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. So 5 through 9, the average final ranking of those 5 guys was 11.8. That's still pretty close. The one thing also that I think this category tells you is that as long as the number is continuously going up, then you still should be at least giving some credence to the pre-ranked numbers. If this line is linear, then the pre-ranking and the final ranking are basically moving in conjunction with one another. But it's not, as we'll see as we get into the next grouping. It's linear inside the top 11, and then it starts to bounce around a little bit. Where it's very linear is the top 9. So Harden, AD, Giannis, Steph, Cat, KD, LeBron, who I know, that was a miss, Jokic, Dame. Because there was really only one miss in there, by all accounts, this line remained pretty predictable. But as you start to get misses in different directions, that's where this one starts to bounce around. Next category that we calculated, and this is an easy one, was the difference. That's pretty simple. We learned this one in second grade, right? Subtraction. Probably first grade. First grade or second grade? I don't remember. It's a long time. It was 30 years ago. This one is simply taking one, subtracting it from the other. Taking the final rank and subtracting it from the pre-rank. Basically, such that if the final rank was lower than the pre-rank, if somebody was pre-ranked too high, by all accounts, you would think of that in your mind as a miss, right? Russell Westbrook was pre-ranked 10. His final rank, on average, was 31. That's a miss by 21 slots. So in this case, a miss is a negative number. You subtract 31 from 10, you end up with negative 21. Easy. It's a very easy category. You can start to color code this one a little bit if you want to look for big misses and big hits. Obviously, large positive numbers would be a big hit. Biggest hit, by the way, inside the top 100, Buddy Hield. Pre-rank 85, final rank 38. 47 slots. Too high. Tied, by the way, with Nick Vucevic in that regard. Vooch and Buddy Hield. By the way, Vooch ends up being the bigger hit because of standard deviations and p-values and such, because he climbed, not only did he climb more people, but he climbed more value, because the value differences up in those larger, in the early ranked guys are bigger. We've talked about that before. Next category, the absolute value of the difference. I don't want to get into explaining math stuff on this podcast necessarily, but for those uninitiated, the absolute value is basically just the positive value of any number. If you want to visualize it, if you're standing in the middle of a road and moving to the right side of the road is moving 1, and moving to the left side of the road is negative 1 in real life. Or actually, you know what? Move forward and backward. That's a better way to describe it. You're standing in place. You can take 10 steps forward. You can take 10 steps backwards. If someone was looking at you from an overall distance perspective, you'd probably say going backwards, that's sort of negative 10 towards your destination. But absolute value just says, how far did you move, effectively? So it doesn't matter what direction you go. You went 10. And that's what we've done with this one. So absolute value here, this category is basically just to tell us how far away the final rank was from the pre-rank. It doesn't matter if it was a miss or a hit. It was just, how far away was it? And the reason that this is interesting is because it just tells you another little piece of information on how close the pre-ranks are and how much they should be trusted. And it also gives us information when we say, okay, well, what's the running live average? And we'll get to that category in a minute. It sort of fluctuates. If you have a couple of misses and then you have a bunch of hits, the live average actually starts to move back towards 0, whereas the absolute value just continues to grow. And to me, that might actually be more important, because that's now saying, look, misses are misses. Whether they're good or bad, the pre-rank was way off. It doesn't matter if there was a Vucevic in there. That shouldn't necessarily help the tracking we're doing. But in certain respects, it does, because it throws a large positive number into a running negative tally. Basically, here's how much it's generally missing by. Here's how far you should feel comfortable reaching. Vucevic is giving you a weird pushback on that. Gobert, Embiid, some of the earlier guys that were off by a round and a half, Miles Turner, Al Horford, Mike Conley, these guys are all actually throwing a tiny wrench into our number. And I'll explain that as we get to that column here in a moment. What column number are we on? Doesn't matter. This is, I think, 5, column 5. This is the live sum. This is a full sum of the difference, not the absolute value. This is a live sum of all the misses, all running together. So, James Harden was a negative 1. Then Anthony Davis was a positive 1, so the live sum at that point is 0. Giannis was negative 2. Steph a 0, so that doesn't change anything. Karl-Anthony Towns was a -1, so now it's -3. Kevin Durant was a -3, so now it's -6. Anyway, it just takes the difference column, which I explained, that's 2 columns back, and just adds them as you roll. This one's not that helpful because this number is going to get big pretty quick. But what to me is helpful is the running live average, which basically says we are, X number of picks into our draft, and the live sum says -23, and we're 8 picks in. What's the average miss distance at that point? And at that point, it's -2.88. This is the difference, not the absolute value. So -2.88, meaning that by the time we get to Nikola Jokic, who's the 8th pick, a pre-rank 8th pick, we're -23 is the distance of all 8 of the picks to this point. And 23 divided by 8 is 2.88. So -2.88. What does this tell us? Well, the live running average tells us basically how far away, and this is still very much a small sample size situation because there's only 8 picks and it's only 1 year's worth of data. But by the 8th pick, what this is saying is, look, if you really want to go, if you want to take the 9th, 10th, or 11th pre-ranked guy, you should feel somewhat comfortable doing so. That's the very simple explanation to that. But it really doesn't, to me, give us the full story. And this, to me, I think is where I like to get into the weeds a little bit. The live absolute value sum, which is going to be very different, by the way, than the live sum. Because the live sum doesn't take the live absolute value sum does not just take the absolute value of the live running sum of the differences. I know I'm getting into the real weeds on this one, and you guys are probably going to think about turning off the podcast at this point. But I think it's really important to understand why we got to this particular category as, to me, kind of the one that really dictates things. The live absolute value sum is important because it takes the absolute value of each individual difference and then adds that to one another. So this is actually going to increase in the positive direction a lot faster than the live running sum increases in the negative direction. Especially as we get into the part where there are some actual hits. It's very hard to have a big hit in the first round because you just can't get that far out in front. Russell Westbrook was pre-ranked 10. He could be as terrible as, number 90. Like, you could have a -80 if you wanted to inside the top 10. Ben Simmons was a -48 at number 14. You can't have a positive 48 at 14 because the best you could possibly have there is a plus 13. So inevitably, the difference here is going to be a negative number. You're going to miss. It's sort of a loaded question because the answer is definitely going to be that the pre-ranks miss by being too high. Unless they get every single one perfect. That's sort of a best-case scenario. Right? Because, if James Harden is number 1, Anthony Davis, best-case scenario, is number 2. You're not going to have a positive number there. It can't be done. You want the smallest possible negative number. Or, and this is where we get into our other note here, the live absolute value average, which just tells you how much it's missing by, hit or miss. And the reason this is important is because as you get into, forget the top 8 or 9 or whatever that is, the lesson is the same as it was in years past. In the first round, you pretty much want to draft a guy pre-ranked in the first round, with some small exceptions. Guys like Westbrook, where it's pretty clear at a very quick glance he doesn't belong in that number 10 slot. Outside of the really obvious ones, you don't want to take too many chances in the first round. There might be 1 or 2 guys that you dodge, which means, if you have the 10th, 11th, 12th pick, you have full permission to go to 13, 14, 15, that territory. But if you have a pick inside the top 5, 6, 7, pretty much every year, you want to stay within probably the top 8 or 9 guys. That lesson isn't changing anytime soon. What the live absolute value average is telling us is that as we rumble through this thing, this is going to tell us how far the hits and misses really stray from the pre-rank. We could do a running per 10 on those as well, and maybe I'll throw that into a future podcast just to sort of, where the different fluctuations might occur. But I do think the live absolute value average is actually a pretty entertaining number to look at, because you can isolate the big jumps. Maybe that would be another fun category to throw. The difference in the live absolute value average between each pick. Because then you can see where the big ones really sort of threw their weight around. Inside the top 10, it stays pretty low. 4.9 is the final number at Russell Westbrook. And all that, and by the way, that's including his giant miss. It's still telling you that the average distance between the pre-rank and the final rank is less than 5. That's pretty good. Without Westbrook, by the way, the top 9, Damian Lillard, the cutoff, 3.11. So if you had the 8th, 9th pick, this is basically telling you that if you stay very close to the pre-ranked number, you're probably going to get a guy who's ranked somewhere between 6 and 12, effectively. Again, once more, removing the obvious contenders to yank these things out. And by the way, I thought Victor Oladipo would be a better pick than he was. He ended up worse than Russell Westbrook, so it's not like I can put a feather in my cap. But I thought it was pretty clear that Westbrook didn't belong in that 10 slot. Victor Oladipo, obviously, he moves the needle pretty far on that absolute value average thing. That jumps from 4.9 to 7.7. Ben Simmons jumped it from 7.7 to 10.6. But here's the fun part about all this. The reason that this absolute value average becomes a useful tool is that it actually sort of builds in an expectation that the pre-rank is going to miss the final rank by a few slots. This is why we also probably need that per 10 coming up, and I'll work that in on the absolute value side as well. When Paul George was a miss by 9 in the positive direction, this is a win by all accounts. The live absolute value average only changed 7.7 to 7.8. Because the expectation is that by the 12th pick, it should be missing by about a round. And that shouldn't be an expectation. So the fact that it only missed by 9 was almost kind of a win in this department. And that's why you need that running tally to see how this all shakes out. So we'll work that in on the next one. In fact, I think as this turns out, this ended up being about a 32-minute show, just explaining some of the numbers that we're working on. The next time I have a solo pod, I'm going to work in the absolute value average on a per 10, basically a running tally of how that's doing over the last 5 to 10 players. And that's the number we're going to start breaking down when we look at how far away should you be willing to venture from the pre-rank to your draft pick. What I will tell you is that very clearly this year, No Man's Land hits in the late 40s. Can you believe that? Holy smokes. That's crazy. That's a crazy, crazy thing. That's normally in the 70s. It started early this year. Meaning the pre-ranks, everybody, the world, nobody had any idea who was going to be good. After the top 45 guys, basically. I know I said that last week, but I wanted to stress it again because that's a crazy, crazy number. Okay, next solo pod. I don't know when the hell that's going to be, but put a pin in this one for now. We're going to talk more about this because I think this is one of the most important things you can do. For me personally, and you know I like to put my players in buckets. I categorize my guys in buckets. Mostly that means I eliminate the players I don't want, and then I throw the rest of them into okay, I'd be okay getting this guy here. I'd be okay getting all of this grouping of guys in this range of draft picks. And then I have buckets. To those of you out there that actually do a full, 150 players, you do your own full pre-ranks, maybe this is not that important. To those of you that take your Yahoo draft and you build the entire queue beforehand based off of your pre-ranks, this is not that important. But for the 98% of us that go into a draft in a Yahoo draft room with our buckets and our targets and our avoids, when you start to get into the middle parts of the draft in particular, and you're trying to figure out who everybody else is taking when, this is an incredibly helpful tool to know how far you should be willing to reach, what round you should start doing that in, when you should go get your guy, and when you should actually look back and say, you know what, maybe these pre-ranks actually do know a little bit of something. Helped me so much over the last 2 years. I generally have one draft where I'm kind of getting my bearings, but after that one, I happen to think my drafts have been outstanding. Last couple of seasons. No way I would have won my head-to-head league without a great draft this year. And this is a huge reason why. You have to know when to target your guys. That part of it, the human element, we try to take a little bit of it out by understanding when we can venture off on our own. And that's your Monday show before my voice goes out. I'm Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today. Hoopball and Kawhi Niles Kona Coffee presentation. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Back tomorrow, Gambling Tuesday with my guy Neil Rochlani. Brandon Marcus on Wednesday. And then I get my nice respite. God, man, it's nice to do only 3 shows a week. I'd say my voice feels great, but, I think I strained something anyway. Thursday will be Neil and Ethan. Friday, Adrian and Coach. That's your week upcoming here on Fantasy NBA Today. We'll talk playoff series wagering tomorrow as we get into the conference semifinals. We'll talk about some results from the first round, and Neil and I will do a little catch-up on some of our angles from a season gone by. Once again, I'm Dan Besbris. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.